The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zipursky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Michael Zipursky here, and I'm very excited to have Colin Hunter joining us. Colin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. Joy to be here and talk to somebody in Vancouver as we were just having a quick conversation. One of my favorite places. So, yeah. Yeah,
the rain is pouring today. It is quite dreary outside, but we're going to uplift everyone, or at least uplift myself from the weather around us. And I'm really excited to have you on the show here today, Colin. You are an author, mentor, an entrepreneur, coach, and the CEO of Potential Squared International, a business you've been running for a couple of decades. And your team specializes in creating and delivering leadership assessments and development solutions that disrupt the way people are led. You also have a new book, which we'll talk about, called Be More Wrong. It's all about becoming a better leader. So I really want to dive into that because I'm sure that there are many insights from the book, as well as your experience of building this business. And as we talked about before hitting the record button, you've worked and lived around the world. And so I'm really excited to kind of gain your perspectives and learn from that. So I definitely want to get into, the area around failure, because that's something that you talk a lot about, and how failure can actually help people to become better leaders. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear about what you were doing before you actually started Potential Squared International, because I know you mentioned you were in Paris, in London now, but you've spent time in the US. Just taking it back to the early days of kind of, Colin Hunter 1.0, what were you doing? How did you get to where you are today?
We could have a long conversation on this. So, if I go back, way back, I was experimenting as a child. So I was experimenting with people, groups of friends, mixing them together. But I never realized what it was that I was good at, or I had a passion for, until later. So first part of my career was following everybody else's advice but my own, and going into chartered accountancy. So I'm one of those people that had Arthur Andersen on my CV. And so I was a tax consultant in the days where you did hand computations of tax returns. And then I left that, and by luck or by chance walked into Procter & Gamble and was sales and marketing pharmaceuticals. But it was only after a breakdown around the age of 30, which I talk openly about now, where suddenly realized I was doing something I hated. And it wasn't about the job. It was just, I wasn't fulfilling my passion. So I got in that space. I had a kick up the backside, as we say in the UK, that made me realize that I needed to do something different with my life. And since then, been on a journey around exploration about consulting, about coaching, fell into leadership through few connections. And then I've started to work up my mindset around leadership. It was only 2007 where we really got going, where I suddenly realized that we weren't practicing what we preached. So a lot of the philosophy that I hear your other guests coming on, for me, started 2007, where I started to realize I needed to create almost playgrounds and experiments to work up new thinking, but also to live and practice what everybody else was preaching and I was preaching about leadership.
I really want to hear, kind of dig more into what drew you to leadership. Like, what was it about the concept of leadership? But before we do that, you hit on this experience that you had that I think so many people find themselves in, where they're essentially following other people's expectations or advice. Looking back on that kind of stage of your life, what advice would you have for others? Like, how do you think that you could have potentially played that a little bit differently, or made different decisions that could have had a different trajectory on your life? Because I'm thinking about the person who's joining us right now, listening in, watching, and is in a place where they might be doing work that isn't really fulfilling them. Like, there's something inside of them where they're doing it because it's a good job, it's providing good benefits or money, but there's something's missing. So what would you, if you reverse engineer that, what advice might you offer?
So, one of the biggest things I have as a philosophy is I move from work-life balance to life balance. And so I did it for two reasons. One is that we waste so much energy trying to to be something we're not. And I see so many people who, they're smiling or they're laughing or singing before they walk into an office. As soon as they walk through the office door, their personality changes. And a lot of my coaching has been around almost releasing the original version of you, with the Beatles, the documentary that's just come out. So, releasing that original bit that you were working on there, you were happy in the space, you were happy. So life balance is one thing, but the second thing is that I never felt that I should have grown up, or I feel now I shouldn't have grown up. And I say that because if we think about back to when we're a child, we have a self-correcting system. So our mind is able to adjust, to cry one moment, to laugh, to fight with our friends and make up with them the next moment. And all we do is we add on layers and layers of advice or fears, or in my case, imposter syndrome when I was growing up. So the second bit of advice I always go back and say is, so if I was to revisit the person who was the child, and not too young, but the teenager, what would you be doing? What would your passions be? And start there with your career. And then I would encourage people to experiment. It's what I'm doing with my daughters. Go experiment, play. My eldest is just about to go to university, but just do 2 degrees. Do French and economics, or French and business. Go explore. Go learn about Paris. Go live in Paris. Go learn about different cultures, and don't fundamentally grow up until you've had a chance to play. And that's part of my philosophy as a playground. Create your own playgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. So for you, as you started to discover this concept of leadership, or at least have it more structured or formalized in your mind, what was it about leadership that really drew you to that? Because I know that you had some experience working as a sales manager, kind of head of international business. But for you, what was it about leadership because to this day, a lot of the work that you do, or the majority of the work you do from what I've seen, is still connected to leadership. So what is it that draws you to it?
I think it comes back to the definition we hold of leadership is agitating for the future. And therefore, the restless that I've had in my life is always played to that. So therefore, I'm never happy. Part of it is the imposter syndrome. I'm never happy. I'll listen to this podcast back and think, I could have got this answer better. Or should I have said this? Or did that sound stupid? So I'll always listen back. But this restless piece is also about agitating for the future. If you think about leadership in a different context, it's Nassim Nicholas Taleb who wrote Anti-Fragile. He talked about, the Caesars ingesting little bits of poison to make yourself resilient to the future, in terms of if an assassination attempt happened with poison, if they ingested little bits, they'd be immune to the poison when it happened. And a lot of my thinking for leadership is we're future-proofing. We're future-proofing what we do for the future for our organizations. And we can't predict the future. So we've just got to get ready. We've got to be all prepared for your spontaneity session, to quote a Larson cartoon. And that's what got me interested, because I suddenly thought, well, I'm never going to get bored, because I'm going to always be preparing for the future. And there's something about, I think history is useful to look back on. And I loved history as a subject at school. But I'm more fascinated when somebody says they're a futurist. I went on a podcast recently, and the guy who did it was brilliant, said he was a futurist, and that just appeals to me. So that's why I got into leadership. I wanted to create something different in the future. That's what I thought I could do.
And leadership, is this something that you feel only becomes relevant at a certain stage for a business? And what I mean more specifically is, take the solo consultant and compare that to a consultant and founder of a firm that maybe has 5 or 10 or 20 or 50, team members. Does a solo consultant need to be thinking about leadership? Is that something that should even be kind of on their plan or taking up mind share? Or is it really only once you start having a team that you need to be thinking about leadership in your experience?
It's a great question. It's making me think. I mean, 2 answers to this. This is where, when we're working with organizations and they say, so are you going to work with our leaders? And my answer always is, well, leaders at every stage of the business, if you talk about frontline and hotels and luxury, the leaders are the people who are welcoming you at reception, but they're the ones who are opening the door in the car as you walk in. So there's one concept in there, which is that. But the other bits of leadership is, if you think about thought leadership, I was just lucky to sit at a table with Michael Stanier, who wrote The Coaching Habit. Brilliant author, brilliant thinker. And he was just about finishing The Coaching Habit, wasn't published yet. And we were talking about books. We were talking about why you would publish a book. And we were starting to think about leadership, and we were starting to think about thought leadership. And his answer, I'm writing the book and publishing it because I want a business card for my business. And then I started to think, well, hold on a second. There's a concept in here about what is thought leadership. And he's moved right into that space. But then we went into the next presentation, which was about thought leadership itself. And the definition was write, 5 articles in the Harvard Business Review. And I was like, really? It sounds like too much hard work. But the alternative was practice leadership. And I said, okay, so hold on a second. I could do practice leadership. And I believe whether you're a solo entrepreneur, and I know quite a few of them who are, good friends, then there's this choice that you have to be a practice leader at least. And then therefore leadership is about agitating for the future. There is a great book by Dory Clark called The Long Game, which I've just read. And she's astounding in crystallizing the best practices. But her core piece is choose something you're passionate about, focus on it, focus, not sprinkle, and be a thought leadership or a practice leader in that area. And so therefore, I would say for the solo entrepreneur, that's the key thing. What space are you occupying? Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that I've given a lot of thought to because, and still do, but I've recommended the book, Straight Line Leadership by Dusan Djukic, because it's not about leadership of team, it's about leadership of self. And so I'm a firm believer that when I kind of look back on my development as an entrepreneur, business owner, just who I am, I think in the early years, my focus and interest in the concept of leadership was so that I could perform better, so that I could, be a better person, even though at times there was no other team members. And as our team has continued to grow, I still need to focus on myself, of course, in developing myself with much room to improve. But the shift has become much more on how to be a better leader to lead the team, demonstrate through leadership. So I think just my kind of viewing this is that there's always, as you said, we're all leaders, and it's important that we're always thinking about kind of what stage we're at and then developing that side of leadership, whether it's leading ourselves to perform better and get the results that we want and reaching our potential, or leading a team. So yeah, the great perspectives from you on that. Thank you. I'm interested in your experience as a sales manager and a head of international business. Many consultants, when they start their companies, they don't have any sales or marketing experience. And so they're kind of thrust into all of a sudden the requirement to sell themselves, essentially, to sell themselves as the product. What was your experience when you kind of started your own company? How did you find your experience of being in sales helpful or not helpful? Like, where did that kind of lead you to as you started your own consultancy?
Yeah, I mean, we have something. We've written our narrative for our business, and one of the chapters is, what are your problems? And we've taken a line from Lord of the Rings, which is we've been going around in circles. So we have, and it is fascinating. So if you go to a networking event for consulting firms and you ask the question, so what's the best route? Is it to get a salesperson who sells and then you get your delivery team behind it? Or do you get sales deliverer consultants working in there? And we've tried everything. So I started as a sales deliverer. I mean, when I first walked into the Oxford Group, which was my first organization I worked with, I was just given a brilliant leader, set me off on a target and said, you've got 16 days of delivery, or you've got, in those days, £500,000 worth of sales. Now, if you're getting £500,000 of sales, you can have 6 days of delivery. So if you want to sweat your asset, as we call it, then you're going to be doing 16 days delivery unless you want to sell. It was a great motivator. So I literally went down, found Standard Life was my first client, built the relationships, got it to 750,000. So I was working, and therefore, as my old boss said, profit is freedom. So sales was driving me. I was getting salary increases. I was getting a better company car. And I took that into my mentality. And there's probably about 5 of us who started in a similar time with the Oxford Group, and we're still friends, and we still have that model in our mind. But then, and it's funny, you listen to other firms and they go, no, what you need is a VP of sales, and you need to drive a VP of sales, and then you need a strict process, and then you need to get Salesforce.com, and you need to drive this, and then you need consultants who just deliver in specialisms. So we went down that route couple of times, and each time it failed because there was a disconnect. And a key thing for me is it depends on the brand you want as a consultant, because ours has always been about partnership with the client. And I'll give you an example. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've won 3 awards with one client, Akamai. And those awards were based on sitting down with the client at the beginning and saying, we're going to experiment and we're going to fail with you regularly. So we're going to learn fast. We're going to push the boundaries. And it was, by luck of judgment, I sat in a room and said to this client at the time, I said, imagine in 4 to 5 years' time that we are sat at a big award ceremony getting an award for the progress we've made because we've pushed the boundaries and we've done something different. And we both said, yep, we'd love to do that. So, okay, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to fail regularly. So you and I are going to have tough conversations. I'm going to hate every time an email is sent to me because I'm going to worry that we're going to be, going to failing in that tough conversation. And you're going to worry about the next email coming from me. But as long as we can work in a principled way, which was, and this is given to me by a client friend who's now unfortunately passed away, Drew Cameron. He said, with his clients, he works on the principle, if things are going well, go and tell your client. If things are going badly, run and tell your client. So that whole philosophy has been my sales piece where people trust me. They know that I'm in it. They know that I'm going to be honest, know that we're stretching. We know we're going to achieve. So those awards have generated us regular income, but we never rest on our laurels. So what we've worked out is getting consultant players who can sell and deliver and get them to have targets like I had when I was younger of nowadays it'd be 1 million, and then looking at the number of days delivery and just setting them off, creating their own fiefdoms and say, go sell, build your relationships. Yeah.
A question for you on that to just go a little bit deeper. I mean, it sounds like one of your superpowers as part of the sales process and the kind of client development and engagement is honesty. It's not being afraid to have those tough conversations. And I find that very interesting because many consultants struggle with that. They look at the relationship between the client and themselves as the client being up here, higher up, and the consultant being lower down, and they don't see themselves as peers. And so they're kind of at the beck and call of the client. They'll say yes to things they probably shouldn't say yes to, and they are afraid to have those tough conversations or to be very direct for the concern of maybe turning the client off, making them upset, losing the business. How early in your engagement or in that relationship do you have that level of honesty and directness in the conversation with the client? Is it even from the initial kind of sales conversation before they become a paying client, or do you wait until the contract is signed and then you say, okay, let's, here's what we need to be thinking about? How do you view that type of conversation, and when do you have it?
So we have it early because a lot of the work we do is around 3 C's: confidence, conviction, and connection. So confidence is the physicality and the vocality to be confident in the moment. Conviction is about the values and the purpose you hold as a business, but the identity you hold. And the connection is the agile moment. But to do that, if all you have is confidence, which a lot of consultants hold, which is as long as my deck's great, my presentation's great, so I'm going to work in there. But if our conviction is that the only way to truly lead is to be humble, to fail, to learn fast, then we've got to show that in our space. And if we believe that to really be a strong leader, you've got to have strong connection. You've got to have the ability in a psychologically safe way to amplify the voices of your people. And you've got to get them. Reading a great book at the moment, Jocko Willink, around extreme ownership. I don't know if you've read it. But fantastic concept. So to get all of those, actually, you've got to start from the beginning. So I've got a client that I've known for 15 years, maybe longer now. And I remember the first time I met him was in a sales pitch. And we have this exercise for personal brand so they wanted us to do an exercise that would show what we're like. And so, okay, great, we'll do personal brand exercise. And the exercise is, what do you think about me? So you're in a sales pitch. You can imagine, a line of them sat across one side of the table, us sat on this side of the table. And my opening thing is, okay, so we've talked for 5 minutes, we've, broken bread, and now we're just about to go into the content. But I'd like to start off with, I'd like you just to take a pad and pen out, and I'd like you in pairs to write down what you like about me on the left-hand side and what you don't like about me on the right-hand side. So I want you to, and I said, if you're doing this right, you should be laughing. So the people on the other side, including Ian, sat and they wrote their lists, and he was laughing and he was smiling and he had a little sneer in his face and a sly look. And I was thinking, okay. And then you ask them, so give me what's on the left-hand side, and they give you, and as soon as they give something like confident, say, okay, so what gives you that? So we were already going into behavioral work with them. On the right-hand side, they started to give us all the things that they didn't like. So you're too much of a salesperson. So what gives you that? Now, by the end of that exercise, you then flip it around and say, okay, so now that you've given the feedback to me, what I'd like you to do is write down your piece of paper the 3 things I think of you. So it's me to the client. And they're writing the 3 things down. I'm asking them for their 3 things. And in that moment, I'm challenging. So I'm going, yeah, one of those is right, but the other two are this. And so you're starting to get into a conversation which they realize they're going to get, as we call it, refreshingly direct. We're not going to sugarcoat it. We're not going to be blunt, brutal, not going to take people off of the knees, but we are going to tell the truth as we see it. And we're going to explore the truth. So therefore, doing that up front, Ian now is he doesn't bother about any pleasantries. If he's got feedback, we need to talk. Yeah, that's a brilliant relationship.
So is this all done before the actual paid engagement begins?
Yeah, that was done before that. And yeah, we've got to show them.
And how do you think about that from a mindset, pricing, time commitment, experience? Because you're taking time to meet, there's communications, and this is now a series of potentially hours where you're sitting down, having, breaking bread. Like, are you thinking about this? Like, do you do this with any prospective client, or do they have to meet a certain criteria in terms of, in your mind, potential revenue, how valuable they would be, cultural fit? I'm just wondering, I think people would be very interested in knowing how you kind of balance the time and energy to put towards this without knowing whether or not it's going to actually work out.
Great question. I mean, I think in some ways we're not great at working out the value of the client, but the other way around of looking at this is majority of our work is word of mouth. So when we are introduced to somebody, they sort of know about us. They sort of know, well, you're going to get this with Potential Squared. This is, we've got a big lead at the moment, which is worth $1 million. And it's come through somebody sitting down with a wife over a dinner table who's working for another client and saying, oh, is that what you're looking for? Well, talk to Potential Squared. So they sort of know and get that. I think the important thing, though, is when it comes to any of this is we've learned that certain small clients can either become bigger clients. So that's one thing. So looking at certain clients that we started with, and I'm looking somewhere like Skyscanner, when we first started to work with them, became a bigger client for us. But we're also looking at smaller consulting firms that grow and we've worked with. So I'm a big believer that I work with, firstly, what I am passionate about and what I can see as opportunities. But I'm also willing to pay it forward to certain clients. And part of that is putting skin in the game. I hate that expression, but it's the one where you say, right, I'm going to give you 50% off the fee, but you'll pay me the 50% if we do the work in the right way. And that is a great way I've found, because I've never had them not pay on the work because they've achieved what they want to do, but it almost softens the blow.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. And I would also imagine that does create differentiation between others in the marketplace. If you're willing to kind of take that extra step forward and provide greater value than somebody else is willing to provide, that would also lead to more conversations and therefore more engagements. Looking at your website and the work that you do, you offer many different types of services. How does the services you offer today differ from when you began, almost 20 years ago?
I love that they say many, and I'm going to give you the answer, which says, we used to do everything. Now we do much more focused supply, but you're saying many. But it is true because, for example, we are the largest provider of internal audit training for financial services, full stop. We actually got I think it was a PwC letter of assurance to one of the big banks on the basis of, because of the work you are doing with Potential Squared, we know that we can provide assurance of the behavioral patterns that you're providing in there. So if you look back, where we started was Barclays Africa. We were working Barclays Africa, we were working all those pieces. And we basically did what we felt we could do at the time to get a foothold in there. As we've grown, we've developed, we still do internal audit, but we do it around the focus of leadership. So how do you create ownership either in the teams or through the leaders? And I've just adopted an Australian colleague friend's piece, which is how do you get people to own their role, not rent their role, which I love as a concept. So we've started to do that in the leadership context, but we've gradually more and more said, focus, not sprinkle. And particularly around thought leadership, we started to say, okay, so we're about immersion, leadership, and we're about changing mindsets. And we're also about this newer concept around developing practices that lead to habits, that lead to systems that feed leadership. So we've started to really focus our language in that area, which is helpful.
Just to jump in, Colin, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to clarify. So, because you have your like 4 core solutions of assessment, development solutions, virtual reality, and digital learning. And then under development, you have leadership development, team development, talent development, executive coaching, innovation, right? Then you have your assessment pieces. So for you, when you look, even though there are these multiple pieces, you're saying that that's not what it looked like. If we went back 5 years or 10 years, you would have had maybe potentially a lot more services. And so what you've done now is you've boiled it down. Is that correct? Like for you, these 4 of the assessment, development solutions, virtual reality, and digital learning, like how do you see all of those connecting together, or how do you communicate them to a client to say, like, this is the typical starting point, or this is how we tend to work with?
It's a great question. And I don't think we've got it nailed. So I'll be honest on that. I think we're still working on this. The way I draw this together is leadership challenges, or the pain points, as we would describe them, come in many different ways. So we've taken Donald Miller and StoryBrand as one of our frameworks. So if you're familiar with Donald Miller's work and StoryBrand, then we've said, so what are the pain points we deal with? And therefore we've worked up that the key pain points for leadership are assessment and development, either of talent or leaders or people. So that's one area. And actually the skills of assessment and development are core to leadership, because a lot of leadership is about observation, insights, coaching, mentoring on top of that. So we have that. So that's one key pain point. The second key pain point is transitions of leadership. So from your first role in leadership, or even before that, your individual contributor, and how you're starting to get them to have influence without authority, as we would describe it. So we talk about the journey from the first line leader to the second line leader, and then to executive leadership. Where we used to stop was almost at executive leadership. So one of my sweet spots is coaching people to be MD, or actually what I would describe as coaching people how not to be an MD. Because a lot of the times it's, why would you want to do that? Why would you actually? And a lot of people stop and go, really? Yeah, it's not what it's cracked up to be. So there is those stages. But if I had one area that I think is overlooked so much by organizations, or abused in many ways, is talent. And when you look at talent, it's about firstly codifying talent. So what is talent? What does it look like? So if I was talent, what would I look like? What would I feel like to you? What would I sound like? Take the 3 C's in there when I walked into a room. And it's very difficult to tell, because a lot of people, you either see them in isolation. Take the sales role. You never really see a salesperson in action. Even with consulting, you never really see, because normally we're often one person gigs, or we're often working. So what we worked out was that the VR immersion, the use of actors, the use of what we now describe as development centers, where we put people in immersive experiences, shows you very quickly what their true behavior and characters are. Yeah, characteristics. And it's going back to Jocko Willick's piece, which is, when they're training in their boat 6 versus 2, and they're swapping around the leaders, and, boat 6 is failing, and they swap around the leader of boat 2 into 6, and suddenly 6 is winning and wins the race. And what they're doing is experimenting, and they're showing in an immersive environment the power of leadership, the different skills of leadership. So nowadays, what we've done is we've blended a lot of that into, say, how do we create immersive playgrounds that allow leaders to either identify their talent, identify what they're good at or bad at, or starting to look at the leaders of the future, and what they're doing.
And when you look at your services, and again, kind of comparing today to 5, 10, even 15 years ago, how has your pricing strategy changed? Is there any mistakes that you made around pricing in your business in the early days or even more recently that stand out to you?
The honest answer, when we first started, we were around Africa, my business partner and I at the time, and said, okay, as long as you pay us business class flight, we don't care what the day rate is, because we're going to go to Botswana, we're going to South Africa. We were doing some of the best work we've ever done. And we were having weekends, traveling around Africa. It was just brilliant. And that was my biggest mistake, because then you had a very low day rate, which other people were going, well, can you match that? And I'm like, well, no, we can't. So we spent a journey of the first probably 10 years trying to increase our day rate. But what was interesting is the discussion around IP that's come later. So one of our successes was starting to almost quantify what level of IP have we got? What value are we adding? And it was actually starting to do some development work within consultancies. And then you were pitching off and you were looking at a day rate for somebody who was working in a major consultancy. And then you were seeing what you were charging and going, wow, okay. And we were doing code deliveries and going, so I'm leading my company and how the hell is that working? So we started to shift it around. But what's interesting is that there's a piece for us where I still have a passionate belief that if the work is good enough, I'm willing to take a reduced fee. And we've actually started to look at a new project called the 500, which is looking at increasing equity in careers for undiscovered leaders, neurodiversity and other areas. And we're willing to take a massive hit in margin or even reinvest the profit in it. Because unless we can start to transform that, then the new crop of really inspiring leaders that are going to come through are not going to be there to motivate me to do the work I want to do. So we want to start that. We want to build that. And we also have a belief in the future that, a bit like IP in the software technology areas is becoming commoditized and almost given away for free in some cases. I think a lot of our IP will be given for free, and we'll be doing the value-adding work at a higher rate.
And do you think that is kind of a luxury or the potential that you have now because you have a more established firm? If somebody is earlier stage, maybe doesn't have the level of resources, you think a smart move for them to consider as well? Or should they focus more on, doing great work, generating as much profit as they can so that later on, as they take on more and expand more, then they could, have some of these projects where they might be willing to kind of move down their margin or take work that is lower. How do you feel about that?
I think you've got to look at the individual and you've got to look at your drivers, because for certain people, they'd say, look, I only want to work the first 15 years of my life and then I want to retire. And, I look at it and think that's great. But I've always had an infinite game in my mind, as Simon Sinek would say, is that I don't think I'll ever retire. So therefore, I want to just keep enough income in there to keep me going. But I want to also just think about what would happen. So we've always had a plan in the business that we could walk away tomorrow and realize something and have enough to survive. But running a business in a consulting business for me has always been about that I could never see if 3 months ahead, past 3 months ahead. And therefore, we used to work with cash flows where Thursday night cash would come at 11 o'clock at night. I'd be lying in bed waiting for the ping. And, I went to bed happy, sort of middling, or didn't sleep that night. But the piece for me is that if you go back to the Dory Clark work around the long game, there's going to be hard years where you're going to have to reinvest that money back in. And therefore, you've got to cut your cloth at the time and you've got to work hard to do it. And it doesn't come overnight. So, she talks about 7 years. I reckon it's about 7 years is the level to get that through. But that's with hard work and grind. But there are ways now of monetizing through social media, through podcasts, through other places, which can provide you with almost a passive income that allows you to go off and explore in other areas. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert in that. I'm just learning a lot of that myself now. I'm working. So I look at it and I always go back and I go to what's happening with the Great Leave at the moment. There's a lot of people like myself who realize that we want to give something more to society than just a name on a consulting firm. It's deliberate that I don't have my name on the consulting firm. I didn't want to be. I used to be Hunter Roberts, and now I decided it's going to be Potential Squared. I didn't want my name in it. Because I want my legacy to be about sustainability of the products and the thinking and the growth. In some ways, the money is important, but I'm not the wealthiest person in the world. But am I happy? Yes.
Are there one or two things that you've done that you feel are critical in setting the business up so that it does have that legacy, and whether that means selling the business in the future or just slowly transitioning yourself more and more out of the day-to-day so that the business can run without you. Anything stand out that you've been working hard towards, or that you're actively working on, or that you did and you feel really will or has had a big impact?
I think one thing is partnerships. So I do a lot of partnerships, whether it's with Experience Point. We're now partnering with a company called Make Time Count that are not for profit. But I think partnerships is one thing, because there's something about IP and wrapping your IP within a system that adds value to what you do and how you do things. So therefore, I think rather than going out and reinventing, how to do an app or other things, I've always found that partnering with other people provides a certain solid base. And also as a salesperson, if they've got a well wrapped up product, I can sell it and I can go out. And Experience Point is a classic example. Their innovation product, superb. And as a salesperson, I could go out and I could probably earn a living just doing that. So that's great. The second thing on the IP is working up your IP. And we had a mantra in our minds, which is, how do we make money while we sleep? So we started putting the PI2 model together, which is in the book. We started working that up. We started thinking, right, we need to get awards on this. We need to get measurement on it. So now we know that that is worth something, and the data we're gathering is worth something. So that's the second piece. And then the third thing, which is a watch out for me, is that we move towards more of a productizing route to gain a product that could be sold to work. Now, I actually think if I had my time again, I'd work up a business model that was saleable rather than a product, because products, they have their time, they become passé afterwards. So I think what I'm working on with the 500 is a business model that has sustainability, that looks at an impact on society, but that has value in its own entity, and it's almost a movement that it self-sustains its own movement. So that's what I would have looking back in the days. I would stop moving so much towards the product side and more towards a business model that could be sold. Yeah.
Right. Your book, Be More Wrong, How Failure Makes You an Outstanding Leader, I find is such an interesting concept, because so many entrepreneurs and consultants, the word failure to them means loss. It's a negative thing. You have a bit of a different viewpoint on that. How can failure create better leaders?
It's an interesting one. I'm just about to do a course with Ozan Varol, signed up. So I'm doing my own, eating my own dog food and going and learning a bit from him. And he hates the term fail fast. And he wrote an article on it, and he described it as much more about learn fast. So the principle behind Be More Wrong is experimentation. And it is about learn fast. But to do that, you've got to step out of the house. You've got to take a foot in the journey. You've got to go. And then also, if you're going to put yourself into the sea, there's no point in sailing your ship around the harbor. So why not? Ships are meant for sailing. Go seek some rougher seas. So all these principles in here about Be More Wrong are, how do I get myself and my team to stretch ourselves? If you want the course term, get barnacles on your butt, in terms of stretching and pushing yourself. Learn fast. And by learning fast, you're starting to get to the point. And the key element in here is design thinking. If you think about most startups, they've got an early product out there that is getting feedback initially. And even for the 500, we've been putting a storyboard around for the last 2 to 3 months. We've been testing key concepts and looking for holes in our arguments. And by doing that, we've been able to hopefully get a more solid product that goes into design and final prototype and then goes out to testing. So that whole concept about being more wrong as a consulting firm is, you've got to be known for something. You've got to have an area of focus, but you've got to be differentiated. So how are you going to differentiate? By stretching. Maybe stretching in 1 or 2 areas. There's people out there who just have a niche area in data or IP, but it is finding that, stretching it, but remembering people catch up pretty quickly. So every year, what's the next thing? What's the next iteration?
Can you offer an example, Colin, of either in your own business or someone that you've seen or a client where they adopted and really embraced this mindset of it's okay to fail and took action that maybe others would have faced a lot of resistance to or hesitation around, and what the result was?
So, I can give you a couple of examples that we've done, which is, coaching, mentoring. So taking a classic example, if you have coaching, International Coaching Federation says you're only to be a coach. And if you're a friend of Michael Zipursky, who's written a book called The Coaching Habit, and then he's written a book called The Advice Trap, which says, don't give us so much advice. You then come in and say, actually, I want to create a product which is the blend of the two. So you've got all these people in the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, who are going, hold on a second, you're giving advice? That's not coaching. So, well, I'm not going to call it coaching. I'm going to call it catalyst. And the reason I'm going to take a risk and try and have a go at something different is most leaders struggle just to coach. They have advice, they have the mentoring. And actually, if you think about a complete business model in leadership, then you go from having a prototype, an idea, or somebody has an experience, and then there's some feedback or there's a challenge from the leader. The next phase of that is not coaching, because they're sitting there as an individual going, I've just screwed up. The next phase is about mentoring and guiding. So this blend of a more sophisticated conversation about mentoring and coaching, I put into the market. Now, part of it was because I didn't want to be accredited in a coach, because I wanted to still give the advice, but I took a risk. And it's funny how it's been quite successful to go out there. But I failed a couple of times. Yeah. And I failed.
So when you say go out there, what does that mean? Did you write an article? Did you send emails to people? Did you post on social media? Like, what was the action that you took that could have quote unquote failed?
I went into clients and said, I don't believe in coaching alone. I believe in a more sophisticated conversation. And I think most of your leaders are struggling with coaching because you're only going for ICF accredited. I'm going to get shot down by ICF accredited coaches. There's nothing wrong with being an ICF accredited coach, but most leaders are not ICF accredited coaches. They live in. So going into an organization and saying, I'm not an ICF accredited coach. I'm going to teach your people how to coach and mentor in a same conversation. And by the way, we're going to use actors to do it. So we're going to give them a playground with a remote control to stop and start the conversation. And we're going to explore the 50 ways they could have this conversation using mentoring and coaching as a blended solution. How does that sound? Yeah. Now, we got blown out of the water 10 times, 20 times.
Right. So yeah, just actually tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, when you first started getting feedback from people and put it on the table, was there a lot of push or was there a lot of acceptance?
There was a lot of acceptance from the leaders in the room who were doing it, because they were suddenly going, so it's okay to give advice. And said, yeah, as long as you're giving a little bit less advice, and actually you're not doing it because it's the quickest thing to get the person out of the room. You're being very, very clear about it. But we were also getting feedback is you had them. I remember there was a group of 10 senior leaders in a major consulting firm, and we had a horseshoe of them sat around, and we had the actors up front, and we were doing something called forum theater. And all these senior folk were of the opinion that they could solve the problem. And it was a bit like the scene from Airplane, where the passenger's in distress and you've got the first person coming up and get hold of yourself. And the next person's coming in, slapping across the face. Next person's got the baseball bat, the next person. So we had 9 of those senior leaders come in and try to solve the problem in their own particular way. And none of them worked. And it was this beautiful moment where the most junior person in the room came up to the front and used a bit of mentoring, a bit of coaching, got the person to get out of the seats, used the three corners of the room to talk about the 3 issues, got them to visualize it all. And there's just guided them into a solution. You could see all the senior leaders just have this moment, an epiphany of going, I've been screwing up most of my life because I've been telling. Yeah. Or I've just been coaching. I haven't blended it. So that was a classic moment. But if you then said to somebody, so have you taught them coaching? I said, well, no, I've taught them something called catalyst. Oh, I don't like the word catalyst because it's not coaching. It's not mentoring. And so we still do it, but it's successful, but it's not as successful as me.
If the response was negative, like how would you have handled that if there wasn't the kind of acceptance that you received?
Part of me would have been stubborn. So I would have listened, and I would have just asked the questions. And it depends where the feedback had come from. If it was the leaders in the room, I would have listened to them because I would have said, what's really helpful for you to understand how to have a more sophisticated conversation? The other part of me was believing that I and a lot of my colleagues had successfully done this, and a couple of other people I was chatting to the other day have the same philosophy, have done this for many, many years. But if that way didn't work, we needed to find a different way to allow them to have those conversations. And that was our belief. So there's a principle in here that, yes, that we've just found a way that didn't work, find another way. And that's what design thinking has given me. But it's a tough skin. Yeah.
All of our clients, hear me say the words imperfect action multiple times, a week, because I really believe in just my own experience of business, over the years has shown that the more feedback you get, the better decisions you can make. And you can't see success if you're not trying and learning. So I've never been a big fan of the word failure. I just call it learning experiences. So we're very much aligned on this. Before we wrap up, Colin, a couple of quick questions for you. The first is, you're very active. You take on a lot in terms of running your business. You're trying, these different kind of ventures and business models. You're writing. You're clearly reading a lot as well. When you look at the habits or principles or practices that you have that you're using or part of your life on a daily basis, which ones do you think, maybe one or two, that kind of have the biggest impact and support you in achieving and kind of sustaining the level of performance and kind of creation and development that you're able to put out?
So one is definitely headspace meditation. So that's the one, I think I'm on the 1400th day in a row that I've been working, and I measure it every day, 20 minutes. And I find if I don't do that, my ideas are not flowing. I find my best ideas flow in there.
When do you do the headspace meditations? In the morning or?
In the morning. So I've actually, and this is James Clear, Atomic Habits gave me this, but I nest habits. So what I do is I'm up normally at about 5:30. I do an hour workout. I then do 20 minutes or 10 minutes of stretching. I do 20 minutes of headspace. I then do Pilates while I'm also listening to some new music. While I'm also doing all of that, I'm listening to my audiobooks. So how I read so much is I listen to audiobooks while I'm working out. That 2 hours in the morning is the bit that makes me survive. So
you work out and you do Pilates?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I don't know if I've ever heard that before. To me, Pilates could be the workout.
It could be. And it's some days on my cheat days, as I would call them, I just do Pilates. But, 5 days a week that I'm working out. So I'm either doing a Swift on the bike or I'm doing a HIIT exercise. The Pilates for me is a focus on my core. It's a focus on my back that I've had problems with. And I've also added in hanging. So I've started pull-ups and hanging to stretch my back out. But I found that this works for me. And this is where experimentation is. I've experimented with many techniques. I find this keeps my body and my physicality strong. So I do that. And my headspace best ideas happen. Yeah.
Love it. So before we wrap up, I want to make sure that people can learn more about your book, your company, your work. Where's the best place for them to go to connect and learn more?
So for the book, BeMoreWrong.com is the website. So you'll be able to find more about the book. For Potential Squared, it's potential_2.com. You'll find that. And we're just about to set up the site for the 500. So going through the website of Be More Wrong or Potential Squared, you'll find more about that. But that's where you'll find me. All
right. We will link all that up in the show notes. Colin, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure, Michael. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.